Next up on our lineup is the panel discussion, The State of AI, Executives' Perspectives. This session will be moderated by Mr. Ahmed Naeemi, Head of Digital Transformation and Project Management at the BIBF. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers, who are Data and AI Ethics Lead at KPMG and AI Advisor to Standards Australia, Ms. Rossana Bianchi. Head of Research and Infrastructure, Artificial Intelligence Office in the Prime Minister's Office UAE, Dr. Abdelrahman Mahmoud. The CEO, National Cybersecurity Center, Sheikh Salman bin Mohammed bin Abdulla Al Khalifa. Project Director, Supreme Council of Health, Sheikh Khalid Al Khalifa. General Manager, Exploration and Development, Tatweer Petroleum, Mr. Yahya Al Ansari. And Managing Director of BFG International, Dr. Samar Aljishi. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Amal. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today at the AI for All 2020 conference, which is under the auspicious patronage of His Highness Sheikh Khalid bin Hamad Al Khalifa and organized by the Polytechnic Bahrain and the BIBF. We're up for an exciting panel today, and I would like to start by briefly introducing the sectors that the panelists are representing, as we only have about 40 minutes to steer the whole discussion and conclude sort of with a fruitful outcome and recommendation in relation to AI. So I would encourage all the esteemed panelists today to actually pitch in whenever they feel that they need to add any information or anything, even if I direct the question to any of the other panelists. We have today Sheikh Salman Khalifa and Dr. Abdelrahman Mahmoud going to are coming from the background of tech and cybersecurity sector. We have Sheikh Khalid is from the health sector. We have Mr. Yahya Al Ansari, who's coming from the oil and gas sector. We have Dr. Samar Aljishi from the engineering and manufacturing sector. And also we have Ms. Rossana Bianchi, who is joining us from a consultancy background. So I may take questions from the audience throughout the session. So please, if you want to ask anything, please make it concise and to the point while asking it in the chat box that you have. And it should be relevant to the discussion that we're having today. So let's start with the general warm-up question just before we get into the whole discussion about AI and with the different sectors and different areas. We know that AI should be on the agenda of every organization, but currently it is mostly on the agenda of IT departments. Whereas many studies and reports have shown that AI must be on the agenda of top executives and decision makers, including board of directors in the organizations. Why, as leaders, they need to be up to speed on today's top technology trends, and why should they place AI at the top of their agendas? I'm going to open up the floor for whoever wants to start.
So, if you allow me,
so
AI is an incredible new tool. I think we're all trying to get a grasp of how to use it in our business. And I think if we look at all the press that we see around the world, it is transforming business as we know it. And I think it's for every board member to decide how their business needs to leverage AI as a tool. So let's take, for example, Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs today in their high frequency trading is hiring 200 computer science engineers to build up their AI portfolio. Today, the majority of high frequency trading is done through AI. Split millisecond response time to changes in the news, what happens, what the impact on stock. These decisions are now being made with AI. And I think that is one major example. So we're talking about 1/3 of Goldman Sachs teams is IT driven. And so they've taken that informed decision, amongst others, is to invest in artificial intelligence to make themselves more competitive. Now, every sector, every industry is going to have the same impact. whether it is manufacturing, services. AI is going to play a crucial role in making themselves more effective. And I think every board member should look at how they can leverage AI to make their business more effective.
Thank you, Sheikh Salman.
If I may add,
Go
Ahmed,
ahead.
I think, in addition to providing, it's getting increasingly competitive. And if you don't use AI in your organization at some point, then you will definitely fall behind. But additionally to that, I think there's a very strong environmental impact that also could come in from the implementation of AI solutions in various industries and businesses. Particularly when you get into manufacturing and some of the physical types of business, then the use of AI solutions actually reduces substantially energy consumption, it reduces material consumption, it reduces wastage substantially. And today, that's something we really need to do on a global level, is to be much more mindful of the environmental impact. And I think boards are responsible from corporate responsibility to ensure that their organizations are aligned with this global goal as well.
So basically, you're mentioning that that will actually also, using AI will lead to big cost savings, basically, in the organization as a whole.
Correct.
Which will have a positive impact on the bottom line.
Absolutely.
And what about Dr. Abdelrahman from the UAE? What's your take on that element? Is it the same also in the UAE, where we have you have AI is on the agenda of IT, and it's not mainly on the top executives' agenda, or?
So what I usually say is, when you want to assess the impact of something that is currently happening, you always have to look at the history behind it, right? Or the history of humanity. We went through 3 industrial revolutions that changed the course of mankind, right? So that transformed the way that countries operate. The civilization is moving ahead. Now we're on the 4th industrial revolution. So you have a host of technologies around that, right? You have 3D printing, blockchain, Internet of Things. Yet AI is more prominent, right? It's always the focus of everything. It's at the center of this 4th industrial revolution. You have global leaders talking about it. Even the brightest academics talking about it. That this is transforming how governments are operating, how countries are operating. Now, to go to the impact that it's having at a very low level, I mean, in the health sector, for example, and radiology, AI is being heavily used in MRI devices, for example. I've seen that Siemens, Toshiba, they're implementing state-of-the-art AI techniques to reduce noise in these images that they're taking. So the MRI that used to take 40 minutes to analyze can be done in 20 now, hopefully in 5 minutes later. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Actually, that leads us to a question I want to ask. We keep hearing and reading a lot about UAE's AI strategies, investments, and a lot of elements when it comes to AI. Can you please shed some light into what is the UAE doing in this field, and why a governmental office was established in the AI field?
Well, that's a good question. So in 2017, the UAE announced the AI strategy, basically, which aims to make the UAE a leading nation in AI by 2031. So that means be a leader in developing technology, adopting technology, being really the go-to place for AI. Now, to achieve that, we have to look at it as in a holistic view, right? We have to consolidate all that effort into the direction that we want to head in. If we leave things as they are, you will not get to the outcome that we are looking. So we established the Office of Artificial Intelligence, which is basically tasked to achieve that vision. Now, in this office, we have 3 main pillars. One of them is the capacity building, upskilling people, training, ensuring that the right training programs are there. Everything we do, the talent is at the core, right? So this is the most important thing that you can do, is build up the talent. The second pillar is international cooperation. So this is something that I always love to emphasize, and it's very important, is that you don't tackle AI as a single researcher, as a single entity, even as a single country. So we established numerous MOUs with other countries, what we call AI bridges, to exchange expertise. So we basically exchange talent, have joint programs, really learn from each other. This is the way forward. It's a collaborative effort, not competitive effort. The third is governance. So we went, so throughout this past 3 years, we went through 3 phases implementing this AI strategy. We started by properly and deeply understanding what exists in the UAE in terms of AI. So we know that companies operating in this domain have been around for quite a few years. So we set out to understand and survey them, right? Understand what are their pain points. And then introduce regulations and governance elements that support them, right? We want them to grow. We want this ecosystem to thrive. So these are basically the 3 main pillars that we are looking at in the UAE.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Abdelrahman. Actually, I'm going to get back to you about the capacity building element shortly, but we'll move into Mr. Yahya Ansari. I want to hear your voice now, but I have a question for you. So when it comes to oil and gas industry, we all know that the timeliness of action is very critical. There may be huge financial incentives if, for example, oil production has been produced few minutes or hours earlier or faster. Can you advise us, Mr. Yahya, on the potential uses of AI in this field?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ahmed. To be direct to the point and this question, and oil industry, actually, it is maybe one of the industries that has huge potential for implementing AI. Nevertheless, it's a bit challenging when it comes to the fact that AI depends heavily on data, accurate data, and the amount or volume of data. Usually, AI becomes more efficient when you have big data to deal with. And because of the business nature in oil industry, that it is more of competition between oil companies and international oil companies, sharing the data is a huge challenge. Nevertheless, AI actually, it's one of the major decision-making tools in oil industry and in oil companies, especially things related to oil price, for example, predicting the demand. This is very essential when it comes to staying ahead of the game and be prepared to deal with the production level. So I would agree definitely that, and this is only the business side of it. But if you look at the technology side of it, it's a huge, which most of companies today, oil companies, especially international oil companies, they have AI as a major tool to minimize the cost, optimize the operation, enhance the efficiency of their assets, and also maximizing the production, basically.
Thank you, Mr. Yahya. Just a last question. Are we up to date when it comes to these data and elements using AI in Bahrain? Are we actually using any AI sort of applications in Bahrain? I keep hearing about this digital oil field over and over, but can you let us know what we are doing in Bahrain, basically in that area?
Okay, to start with, as a definition for or a background, what does it mean, digital oil? Basically, it has two sides, but let us go with the common understanding of digital oil, where we have the automation and data streaming as a main element for all the facilities and asset management when it comes to surface facilities, for example, having all the data flowing to a single point where creating a database, let's say a dynamic database, basically, allowing all the machine learning and from that all the way to decision taking. And mainly here is to deal with efficiency. the main objective. But if we specifically talk about Bahrain, and Tatweer Petroleum, actually, we started this a few years back. Although it is I mean, people should appreciate that Bahrain field is a very, very ancient field. It's a very old field, discovered in 1932. So you can imagine the amount of legacy facilities and old wells that we are dealing with. In addition to all the new wells that we are reaching, more than 2,000 wells. And I'm talking about single field, which is Bahrain field. But we have this technology being used to, again, to apply preventive maintenance. For example, we have more than 500 or 600 beam pumps on the field, where we can release streaming data from all these pumps in order to maximize the production and have sort of predicting which pump might fail in a short time. So we go and do some maintenance to avoid dropping in production. So this is a simple example that we are using AI for.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yahya. Moving to you, Sheikh Khalid. Health has been under the spotlight since the start of COVID-19. And a lot of AI development has been taking part during that period. And a lot of people have reverted back to or start putting attention on AI as a technology where they're using a lot of, developing a lot of applications, using the data and all that. So how can the Health Council contribute in Bahrain, basically in expediting AI applications in the health sector, and what we are doing in that regard?
Very good morning. I think, yes, we started today's conference with Sheikh Hisham mentioning a couple of areas where healthcare has been utilizing AI to solve a lot of the issues, let alone the COVID situation we are in required quick action. And I think this is what artificial intelligence brings into healthcare, is quick decision making. And I think this has been very well noted. The Supreme Council of Health, we have a project which we call Sahati. The project is basically collecting all the health and medical information in a central repository. And I think this is the first part of an AI journey, is to be able to provide interoperability between the different systems that are in the kingdom. So we can apply artificial intelligence within one facility. For example, we have in Bahrain already, we have the automation of pharmacies, for example. But if we bring this into the national level, we are able to predict how we can better manage drug procurement, which costs millions when we compare it with the overall budget. So I think this is where we are heading towards, is being able to provide the data required for health AI initiatives.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sheikh Khalid. One also question actually for Sheikh Salman. Cybersecurity has been talk of the town in the past few years with the growth of AI and other techs. You're now a CEO of a recently established National Cybersecurity Center. What kinds of threats we are creating through these technologies? Will there be sort of threats by implementing AI solutions, in your opinion? Are you seeing any of those sort of trends, something happening from your end that you can share?
As with cybersecurity, the attacker is always looking at basically either disruption or getting data. So the very nature of AI means that we are going to stream a lot of data, and data will be shared, and you'll have access to, for example, the intelligent oil fields. Now, these oil fields need to communicate into a network, and they need to either be sending information or an action can be taken. So that sort of opens up the attack surface. With AI, it's another surface that we're going to have to protect. We start off with IT, which is that's what we all know. We have OT, which is what's managing those oil fields, and we have IoT, that's even more another layer. So we have now that attack surface becomes a lot bigger. And so the work involved in protecting and setting up the infrastructure needs to be done correctly. So with any technology, one needs to do it right. I think that's the message is, yes, we are opening it up. We're having e-services coming up. We have our employees, because of COVID, working from home. And again, managing those oil fields or airports or servers. And that adds risks. And now all these attackers are have cheap tools to work with, are very competent and very talented, and have knowledge in vulnerabilities and security, and know how to circumvent vulnerabilities and security tools. And now they have AI to help them. So it used to take them a lot more time to investigate getting through the firewall, identifying strategic assets, start running those security tools or hacking tools that will take over these devices. That process took a really long investigative time from an attacker. But with AI, that's going to be a lot faster. So we need to be on the other side, more competent, more capable, and have the tools that will allow us to respond faster. So I think that is the AI is now becoming a risk, because not only are we going to use AI, but the attackers are using AI, and not will be using it, are using it.
Perfect, thank you, Shaikh Salman. Actually, we've heard about the applications of AI now in different areas. And I want to hear from also Dr. Salman, but I'm going to come back to that. Now, we spoke about the cyber threats element and what we're doing in that regards. Miss Rossana, I want to ask you, we've heard so many great applications so far in various sectors. Why is it that nowadays there's a lot of talking about digital and technology ethics? And why is it important that we address these challenges as we speak now? We hear about what happens after the end of jobs. How do we distribute the wealth created by machines? How do machines affect our behavior and interaction? All these elements are related mainly on the ethical side. So what's your take on that, Ms. Rossana?
Well, COVID has definitely shifted and changed the risk-reward kind of balance when it comes to technology innovation, and in particularly when it comes to AI. So on one end, we're seeing that we are demystifying technology. So technology is everywhere, and we are increasingly engaging with digitally enabled products and services. And we're also seeing a sort of excitement around the innovation agenda. And in fact, a global study that we launched as KPMG in August this year is actually highlighting that a number of private and public organizations are now seeing digital transformation and AI in the context of digital transformation as a must-have and no longer as a nice-to-have. Now, we are adopting these technologies at a scale and pace that is pretty much unprecedented for humankind. And this means that these technologies are not being used solely for the purposes of achieving and maximizing financial and economic benefits, but they can actually deliver way more benefits in the societal and environmental space. And so there is an implicit kind of rising expectation in the eyes of the public, but also in the eyes of the policymakers, that these technologies will be used for the greater good. And on one end, COVID has kind of shown how the tech for good agenda can actually be pushed and accelerated. But on the other hand, we've also seen that because we're adopting these technologies at scale, we're not actually taking a step back and really understanding what could be the unintended consequences of these technologies. And so there are two emerging themes that we're actually seeing. One is digital divide. We're talking about exciting applications of artificial intelligence, but in many countries, even Western countries, we still have the challenge around the offline nation. So we still have people that do not have access to network connectivity, that still do not have access to digital tools that are actually enabling the access to these products and services that are enabled by artificial intelligence. And we're also seeing seeing across the board, actually globally, a pretty kind of low or kind of evolving level of digital maturity, both in organizations and also in the public. And these kind of results in the digital divide kind of challenge. I kind of work and live in Australia, and the Australian government, as an example, has set an ambition to become a digital first country when it comes to government services by 2025. And so now the topic of trusting these technologies and doing right by people and communities and societies as a whole is becoming front and center, because there is recognition that we're doing a lot of good things, but there are also many ununderstood or underestimated risks that we need to kind of explore and understand a little bit more. In terms of ethics, it was mentioned before that the scaled adoption of AI actually has significant environmental impacts, and it also has an impact on society. We have seen that in a data-rich environment and in a technology-rich environment, there are many things that go wrong. In the US, as an example, we're seeing facial recognition systems actually exacerbating, unfair practices and discrimination. We're seeing algorithms being used for recruitment kind of practices and discriminated against people with specific features despite comparable experiences and qualifications. We've seen also these algorithms being used by governments, as an example, for immigration and visa purposes. This was actually a case that was reported in the media in the UK, and these algorithms were actually flagged as racist because they were discriminated based on kind of hidden and unfair biases that are kind of featured in the data sets used to design these systems. So I kind of feel that we need to kind of revisit our appetite to invest in some of the use cases, not in the technology as a whole, but in some applications that are slightly kind of more controversial and that also have the impact to actually significantly change and impact our lives.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ms. Rossana. I'm actually, because we have a huge number of panelists, I'm trying to link the questions together to make sense of the conversation. Actually, this question is for you, Dr. Salma. You basically lead a major organization, basically, or a company related to manufacturing and engineering. Techs used for the greater good, as Ms. Rossana just mentioned. A question from the audience. Are there any insights or achievements that have already been made in Bahrain with AI implementation so far? Can you list some examples from your industry, or an example for the sake of time from your industry?
Well, from my own industry, well, we've embarked on our Industry 4.0 journey about 3 years ago as part of Target being a national demonstrator of how Industry 4.0 would help industries to become more effective, to become more competitive, and to become environmentally as well more efficient. So far we've made substantial progress. The most difficult part of our journey was actually trying to develop an information gathering network. The AI basically works on data, and in a lot of industries and businesses, as Ms. Rossana indicated, it's the digital maturity is quite low, and so the ability of organizations to, first of all, you can't really do much on AI unless you have data, and so the most difficult thing, I think, for a lot of businesses is to put together an information network and a data acquisition network to provide a substantial amount of data, put that in a data lake, and then be able to run either machine learning algorithms or AI tools and analysis tools to work on that. So it's taken quite a while actually to put together something like that, because even the maturity of data acquisition tools wasn't really quite there. We've been able to put together, however, a system in place. And just in our industry alone, we were able, over the last couple of years, to reduce, for example, just a simple example, our in-process quality defect rate, which basically is a combination of wastage or working errors and what have you. We're able to reduce that by the use of these modern tools by almost 80%, which is something quite substantial. And that's just the early part of the journey. We're confident that that will be reduced to almost 95% by the time we're done with the development of the project. So the impact is quite high. And I think that's very encouraging for a lot of industries. But I think also, if you may allow, I just go back to point that was raised by Mr. Yahya about data. So the value of data is quite, I think, underappreciated. So data is going to be the new gold. It's the digital gold. And whoever owns data will have an upper hand when it comes to the use of AI. And I think there's probably a debate that should be had, or a discussion at some time in the future, around who owns data, and do companies own their data and trade in it, and and sell it, or license it out, or should data become kind of like public domain, and so people can have access to it and it can be used for the good of humanity as a whole. But if you go from a selfish perspective, if you own data, if you're able to generate and develop data, you're not only providing an advantage to your industry, but you're also building an asset base of something that could be quite valuable in the future.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sam. This discussion is going really nice. I like the point. There are a lot of ways that we can get into in terms of talking about different topics. But I'm going to steer that a bit towards a bit of the talent element or the organizational structure from an executive perspective. We face a lot of challenges, or leaders face a lot of challenges nowadays in terms of the organizational structure. It may be a hindrance to sort of agile developments, and especially when it comes to these technologies, AI and all that, you need to get on pace or get on these technologies really fast. So can anyone from the panelists shed light in terms of how we should work, or how should we bring this AI implementations or AI ideas into our organization if there is a strict organizational structure on board?
Okay, so if you allow me, talent is going to be fundamental, one of the key fundamental parts, because if you have a wonderfully labeled data set that allows you to sort of build your models, if you don't know how to set up that data model and having practical knowledge of building that algorithm the right way, without, for example, the bias that we've seen in the recent times, how do we continuously improve that model? All that fundamental understanding of how to build an AI ecosystem in an organization, then we will see failure. It just will not work. We will see models that have either extremely high accuracy, which means that is not correct, 100% accuracy, which means they built the model incorrectly, or we're going to have a very low resulting algorithm. And so the competency and the practical knowledge, not the theoretical knowledge, but the practical knowledge of understanding the mathematics behind it, and how to take that model correctly and design it correctly with the data set, with the right checks and balances, that is the challenge. What we lack here is basically the formal method of building capacity. Mr. Abdelrahman and Mahmoud has said it correctly. It's capacity building. It's getting that fundamental knowledge out there and making sure we also build into this the mistakes that other people has made. Is we need to protect that information, avoid bias and misuse of AI. We have data protection laws that need to be taught to the students and to the users of AI to ensure that we don't break personal information and expose it in the wrong way. Because nobody knows what is right and what's wrong, but there are laws that govern that, and they are very strong, and they're very close to the EU in Bahrain. So ensuring that we build those models, have the data, and protect it in a practical way, and you take our students from beginning to end, then these students will be an excellent asset in bringing them into the workplace, and then go to either the healthcare sector, they go to the banking sector, or the industry, manufacturing industry, to help solve business problems and make companies more efficient. And that's my opinion.
Thank you, Shaikh. Ms. Rossana, I wanted to actually ask you on that element from an international experience and from a consultancy background. Will it be a great idea to have an AI team in every organization? Will that push development of technologies or AI in the organization itself and remove those hindrances in terms of the strict organizational structures?
Yeah, we're actually seeing large organizations actually heavily investing in having big data and kind of technology teams, and then having specialisms because, there is a lot of excitement around artificial intelligence, but the truth is that there are a number of other critical technologies that are also enabling the use of AI. And in fact, one of the shifts in mindset that we're seeing with COVID is that we're moving from the power of or, i.e. investing in new technologies inside us, to the power of and. So actually really exploring how we can use new technologies in combination to maximize value. And so when it comes to AI, as an example, we're seeing AI being used in combination with cloud, but also in combination with less sophisticated automation technologies such as robotics. So what we're seeing is you have pretty much two options. You have a centralized model where you have a center of excellence for artificial intelligence that serves kind of the various parts of the business, or you actually have a decentralized model where you have technical teams that are very close to the business, and so they understand the business processes and kind of the use cases and the needs inside out and develop solutions. There is no right or wrong answer. I think it depends on the strategy, on how you operate as a business. There is also an option to have a hybrid model, where you have kind of, some sort of delegation to the various business units, but also some sort of centralized coordination and governance. But I kind of feel that one of the key differentiator and success factors is not just thinking about new technologies, but the data foundations around those. Having worked with a few organizations in Europe, the UK, and now in Australia, we're still kind of catching up on the data management agenda, which basically means that organizations want to innovate and they're also investing in new technologies, but they are still grappling with data quality issues. They don't know who is actually governing and responsible for managing data across the organization. They don't actually understand or fully understand the data risk landscape because there are so many regulations around data risk, including privacy, that are actually kind of, duplicating themselves or are no longer fit for purpose in the digital age. So before kind of investing at scale around AI, I think, having the foundations right around data is kind of, a must have. And this is also reflected in a number of ethical principles or trustworthiness principles for artificial intelligence, like the database is particularly important. And I just wanted to comment actually on the question that was raised before this one. In terms of talent, I kind of feel that every single country is now addressing the challenge around talent shortage. Australia is a small country, so we are net importer of IP and also technology. But what is really fascinating is that the whole debate around the societal impact of artificial intelligence is now raising a question around, is having, a team of technical people enough to actually responsibly innovate? And the answer is no, probably no. And so we actually need to combine the technical expertise, which is very much needed, with also expertise in other fields, as an example, compliance, risk management, but also philosophy and anthropology. So the impact on people and human beings really requires, a different type of skill set that needs to be combined with technical expertise. But going forward, I think that we will see more and more of kind of mixed teams that will actually collaborate on designing and then deploying AI solutions.
Thank you, Ms. Rossana. Actually, because we're pressed in time, I'll ask a final sort of a question, and for each panelist can answer. Basically, do you think it's time? It's a question as well from the audience. Do you think it is time for Bahrain to adapt an AI strategy? Dr. Abdelrahman, Mahmoud, if we start with you, if you can tell us about UAE's experience when it comes to AI from a strategy point. Did you set an AI strategy, and what you're doing in terms of that? You mentioned that at the beginning. So if you can just shed light into that in a minute sort of explanation on it, please.
Yes, so the national strategy, what it did was it created a national agenda, right? So you have really the entire government now focusing on that as a single point, right? So the capacity building, as we mentioned, was one of the core pillars that every government entity now is interested in. In fact, one of the things that we did a bit differently, that was really one of the most important things that we did, was create a training program for government entities. So we opened a training program that, let's say, spans 9 months. and took really people who are mid to senior level from government entities and put them through a 9-month program that is quite technical, quite mathematically heavy for AI. When they graduated, they went back to their entities and we call them the AI champions. They are now our AI champions. They bring the change from within, right? If you approach an entity, tell them, okay, this is what you have to do. They will not always accept it because we don't understand their problems. But when they build it up themselves, then that opens the door for collaboration. So announcing this strategy really brought everyone under that same umbrella, right? So you have the governance aspect. Everyone is working together to share data to address these type of issues.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Abdelrahman. Ms. Rossana from Australia, do you guys actually have sort of an AI strategy on board? Or?
Yeah. So we have an AI strategy, and actually what has been developed fairly recently is an AI action plan for all Australians, which basically means now that we have the strategic priorities clear and everyone is on board, what are the key things that we need to kind of focus on to make it happen? And there are a number of challenges and priorities that have been identified as part of that action plan. What I feel, a few countries, including Australia, can learn, from the experiences that we just heard about is actually having clarity on who is actually pushing the agenda around AI. In Australia, we have multiple voices that are actually providing guidelines on what good looks like from a legislative perspective and from a strategic perspective, but we don't have a minister for AI as an example. We don't have an AI office that is kind of fully dedicated to fully exploring this technology. And this is actually something that I feel, we can reflect on and potentially learn from other countries. It's also interesting that in Europe, we're seeing a similar trend now. So the European Parliament just published a recommendation for what the future of AI regulation could look like. And one of the recommendations is actually to establish an AI supervisory body in each of the members of the European Union. And so that is actually kind of, in a way, providing clarity. We have one voice and we have one supervisory authority that is responsible for enforcing regulation in this space. So hopefully we will also make some progress in this part of the world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rossana. Dr. Salman, do you think that AI Bahrain should embark on an AI strategy?
Yeah, I think we've already started on this. So the Economic Development Board has been working for years to put together a strategy built around digitalization, leading eventually to AI. And one clear success was bringing in Amazon Web Services to Bahrain to have a major set of data centers out here. That's obviously a pillar, and we've transferred a lot of the government data into the AWS base as well. And also within the EDB, we've been working on the data protection and data privacy laws as well, and help to pass those through as well. So I think we're working diligently towards an implementation of a national strategy. I think there's still a lot more to be done. And I believe that as my fellow panelists have said, capacity building is going to be very important, but also the way in which organizations can learn and adopt this. So Mr. Abdelrahman mentioned that you need to work from within and you need to train people from within organizations. And I think that's also something I think we're a little bit behind. We need to work internally with organizations both in public and private sector and train people internally. And the way that this works, I don't think it's, a lot of organizations we've talked to in this area start to refer you to their IT department. And I think that just reflects a bit of a lack of maturity. This cannot be driven by IT. The moment you go through IT, it fails. The introduction of AI is something that has to be adopted at board level and at senior management level, and they have to champion it and then have internal champions as well, because it's so cross-departmental. You need to take AI experts plus your operational experts and put them together. And that's a key. If you don't do that, I've seen that it fails in almost all cases where that's not applied.
Beautiful, Dr. Sam. I think we started with that question and we are ending with that as well, which is great. Sheikh Khalid, what's your take on that?
I think we need a sector-specific national strategy. I think talking about the health sector, we're doing a digital transformation project, but we need to include AI in that. I think that, yes, as Samar said, it's required to come from top down and this is what we are trying to do through Supreme Council of Health, is combine all health entities, whether it's hospitals, whether it's regulatory entities. So bringing all this together will provide us with a solution that can actually be effective in applying change in the health sector itself. Yeah, I do agree. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheikh Khalid. Sheikh Salman, final remarks?
Obviously, I think there's a huge appetite in the country to implement AI. The problem is there are so many things that are blocking that path towards AI. And I think a national strategy will help focus everything, and resolve many problems that we'll have, whether it is capacity building, whether having the right expertise to transfer that knowledge to, whether we have the right policies that to enable us, and focus from the executives. And so, yes, a cybersecurity, artificial intelligence strategy is going to be very helpful in expediting our path towards artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Sheikh Salman. Mr. Yahya, final remarks and your take on this aspect before we conclude the session.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. I think we can't talk enough about the importance and how it is crucial to have the artificial intelligence technology being used and applied, and I'm specifically talking about the oil industry at the oil ministry level. In fact, building the capacity and accelerating building the capacity, we have not only started a team within Tatweer Petroleum to bring that technology into the business, but also we have signed a joint agreement with one of the giant international oil companies called Chevron, really to look at the new discovery we announced about in 2018, which is Khalid Bahrain Unconventional Basin, in order really to speed up and accelerate our learning curve and really bringing that discovery into a production. And maybe this is one of the different ways or solutions to build the capacity in different organizations, maybe starting from scratch with a team within the organizations, depend very much on the organization size and nature of business. But other solutions is to join with research and development centers or technology institutes, or outsource it basically to build or speed up building the capacity. An industry like oil industry, I think it is not something nice to have, but definitely it's a must.
I think thank you so much, Mr. Yahya. I think we can go on and on. I think it's quite interesting seeing different points from different panel members, and I'm having like a list of questions from the audience, but unfortunately due to the time that we have, I cannot continue further. I've been asked to actually stop the session now and move to the next part of the conference agenda. I would like to actually thank all our esteemed panelists today. Thank you for making time and being here today, sharing a bit of your perspective in terms of AI. We'll definitely hold other sessions, inshallah, that we will talk even further in terms of basically single areas like capacity building, the national strategy and all that. We're going to hold different sessions, but at a later time, inshallah, between the Polytechnic and the BIBF, so that we can further development in terms of artificial intelligence in Bahrain. Thank you so much once again. Thank you for the audience for being here with us today. On to you, Ms. Ahmed.
Amazing insight there on championing for AI and the importance of a national strategy for AI for Bahrain and the world. Thank you, Ahmed, for moderating this panel discussion, and thanks to our esteemed panelists on shedding light on the uses of AI across different industries. Now we move on with our agenda. It's time for a 15-minute break. See you back at 10:30.